And also, I would like to welcome to our audience here and also online via Zoom and YouTube live. So, today here brings together reflections about ethical challenges on artificial intelligence, especially in relation to sustainability. So, before I begin, I'd like to briefly explain the work. So, we speakers will have a presentation, and I have 30 minutes to question together. So, so right now it's my pleasure to introduce the first speaker. So it's Maximilian Kiener from University of Technology. Welcome. And our next speaker also will be Prashant Kumar from University of Bonn. Please welcome. And also Nicholas Kluge Correa from University of Bonn will present today. So welcome to our. So we are going to start with my presentation. So if you wanted to present from here or and
I think I'd probably go there. Thank you very much for having me. Muito obrigado. Okay. I'm very happy to be here and talk about something that's been on my mind for a while now. On the so very often in debate technology and ethics, think about the guardrails, the limits, so the red lines, basically all the things that you must not do. Ethics is portrayed as the place where ideas get developed. Today, I want to ask the opposite question. What is the place where they learn to live? What is ethical reflection connection help better? Not just more science, but genuinely the better technology. And that kind of transports the growth of ethics from being just a no-sayer to an. So I want to kind of overrule some of the press articles that we've all seen, whether it's in the European Union, in the US, China, or also globally, where people often portray these negative times. And I want to say that a bit more. I want to support that view, one central idea or approach, which I call ethics. So deep ethics is an approach that says we can't just wait technology already developed, then think about if it's any good, can we use it? But we need to think to the very development of AI. So deep ethics is a combination of two things. So it's based on an ethics by design framework. So integrating ethics into the very development of AI, not waiting it. But it has two more kind of specific things it's based on. One is the idea that it can translate qualitative ethics into quantitative methods. Ethical principles are often very abstract and qualitative justice. But there is, at least to some extent, not all the time, but to some extent, a way of translating it into a mathematical language that AI can process more. For that, we'll discuss it. This is one of the things that deep ethics tries to do. And the other kind of feature of that approach is that it argues for the non-neutrality of intelligence. Many of you will know the non-neutrality of technology, so that it's not ethically priority values. And I want to say something more general, it's human. So here's the core idea. think about how if you have children, not the case that we are logical and only like step up. Then somewhere in age 10, you get required. Our sense of what's fair and from the very beginning. And if humans don't have that, they're also switched to their intelligence. And I want to say there's something similar to of AI. The way these systems get intelligent or smart is not possible without an ethical profile. I'm not saying that it couldn't be an ethical profile. I'm just saying it can't be neutral. So the claim of the non-neutrality of intelligence is not that it has to be a moral saint or an angel to be intelligent. I want to illustrate that with an example of bioethics AI and maybe combine some of the themes of that conference. And so it all starts with him. So this is our dog at Hamburg on campus. And then I can explain one of the machine learning techniques that will now play a role called reinforcement. And let's start with him. So if you want to teach him a trick, whenever he gets the ball, and the closer Sparky gets to performing the perfect, the more beats he gets. So in psychology, this way of teaching or learning, and in machine learning, there's an analog, and this is. So let's move Sparky to Spooky. The Spooky is just, a symbol of any kind of AI system, starting to move around randomly in a digital environment, like playing a game. And so whenever the AI system does what humans wanted to do, it will get right, or what is called reward machine learning. Meaning these systems are sentient or conscious in any way. They just have a reward function, something that they are programmed to. So whenever the system does something that it gets right, then it gets a reward. So reinforcement learning is basically in computer science, but operant conditioning is animal learning, psychology. And so what we can ask when we train AI, so note that this is the very process by which these systems get smart. So one of the processes by which we can ask ethical questions. I said reinforcement learning is a type of machine learning with AI, where the agent learns through trial and error. Finds us now, what are those rewards where the agent rewards or punishes? And so here is a way I in allocating intensive care units. We've seen during the pandemic that it can be very overwhelming for the time and the people. So what should be the reward function when AI assigns a score to a patient based on the risk? Guide IC better allocation the way that aligns core and practical constraints. So basically, what we would have AI in some way or another, we would have a core system like that, have a process, but you can see on the horizontal risk level of the patient. So you get someone in, the risk level, they have a severe health consequence, 20% see treatment immediately. For AI system, would assign a priority level. So, this patient definitely get a bad score. It's not that important that they get. And depending on the priority level, the AI system would then get prioritized for patient. So the patient has a 90%. The AI prioritizes the patient, then the AI gets the safety group. So they did the right thing. Patch the ball, did the right thing. If there's like a 0% risk, if the highest priority, you would not get the reward. So if there's no risk, you shouldn't waste the money. And so when we train the system, in practice, this would be a bit more complicated, and like markup processes, but this is, a reference we will need some kind of function that tells us, depending on the risk level, what should be safety reward. And there are some, whatsoever, no safety reward. If there is a maximum risk, 100% maximum safety reward, we want to be sure. And in the middle, kind of increase industry to the mathematicians, because it wouldn't make sense to get a lower safety reward than the risk. So talk about, but this would be, a first starting point for the training. But what I want to show you now is that that red line has some provisions from an ethical perspective. You should do something else. And eventually that will lead that the ethics determine the mathematical function of the AI training. It determines of the AI getting smart in the first place. Then it illustrates the claims of ethics. So ethics of mathematics. Very existence. Now I want to look at 4 principles from medical ethics, and these are those. Then there might be more considerations that are relevant, but I think these are very well-known principles from bioethics that do play a role. Think about who should enter the hospital. It's certainly the principle of beneficence would be good. There certainly is the principle of caution, to safe and sorry. We want to make sure that there is sufficient assignment of responsibility in high stakes situations. And whenever resources are scarce, a principle of justice as well. So now what we want, the task is, we want the function under the red line that reflects those principles. And this is not an easy question. Now, these are very general. Could you ever express them in numbers, functions? It shouldn't, but I'm going to try. So that was our starting point. That was good. Yeah. Beginning, the line is a bit too steep. We want ideally is something like a skateboard ramp. So this is now my favorite part. So this is a complex start. Beginning, when the risks are very low, we don't want to waste the resources, the hospital beds. We don't want to send people in when the risks are still low. We also don't want to maybe expose them to medical treatment that could eventually also harm them. There's always risk of being harmed when. So if you think that the red line is a bit too steep at the beginning because it might waste resources and harm people, on the grounds of the principle of beneficence says something different. We want to go skateboard ramp. This difference between red and green is what you about. It's not a mathematical, purely. Now we start with the skateboard ramp. I think at the end we want to have an umbrella effect because concave, where then the second derivative is negative. Why? The red line is way too long until getting out close to 40. So in some interval, just we want to get higher rewards. Better safe and sorry. We don't want to wait for between the red and the green line is the difference in how risk averse you are and how you again you want to, but finally, when we think about the healthcare context, we want to make sure responsibility is assigned. And some of you may know there is this worry that when we use AI, that we be responsible. No responsible. Part of the reason is because it's so hard to anticipate the best AI systems tend to be the most opaque ones. If we have a smooth line the green line, and not a discrete function that jumps too much. It's easier for people in clinical practice to understand what might happen when risk is a smooth line for the stability, the intelligibility as a condition. So again, an ethical argument, not a mathematical argument. So this is what we would want to avoid, the kind of black line way too steep. It would not be that makes it easy for humans to deal with. Final point about justice and is we can shift that inflection point in the middle of. So we could have it to the left or to the right. And this is significant because everything that is underneath the curve is a representation of how many hospitals we have. So the integral, the bracket, right? And for that reason, we want to make sure that when we have these that the way we position that certain point reflects. And so I kind of gave you a somewhat rushed through an explanation of which function you should choose to make the system intelligent when you do reinforcement. But as I showed you, there are arguments for different change in that function. So I've given you for the skateboard at the beginning, the umbrella at the end, smooth line, the tipping point. And if we combine those elements, we get that function. So what I basically did was I took 4 ethical principles, made some assumptions about those principles, and led it to a rather specific mathematical function. So this is deep ethics for 2 reasons, and this is my first statement.
You have time, still.
Still 10 minutes. Okay, great. Anyways. So I said I introduced deep ethics with 2 statements. So I said, it is in the design development of the AI, and it can do a translation. It can translate ethical principles into sort of for the AI training. So this is what you can see here. So the kind of ethics was very qualitative, vague, something like if risks are very low at the beginning, hold your horses, don't too far, give the hospital back, and send them home. At the end, also, when risk makes them sorry, don't wait until the point of hospital beds. Make sure that 60% risk, take this risk. And just on the basis of these reports, combination of the different shapes of the functions over those intervals, I got this sigmoid function as a training. Now, when you talk to an engineer or a mathematician, they don't mind whether it's the red or the green line, as long as you can differentiate the function at any point. But from an ethical perspective, it makes a huge difference. It reflects different ethical priorities. So this was kind of the first point that we connected to the quantum metric. There is worry about this approach as well. It is in some extent flattening. The mathematics, metric, but not the language. So we would need to be very careful not to fall prey to the Langdon winner in the 1980s called the Earth allocation. So we adopt our ethics rather than demanding it the other way around. Sometimes, because maybe at the moment this is the only way of making sure AI systems are responsive to ethical. And the other point is no matter what you now, if you think about it, the training of AI will inevitably reflect ethical priorities and trade-offs. So if you have a good case for using AI in healthcare, better, then you address it explicitly rather than leaving it to chance. So with this next slide, I don't want to give you the ultimate right to agree with me and say the red line is better here. The only thing that I put forward as an argument is that it is a condition that given for particular policy and so the second point then, in addition to quantifying ethical ideas, was about the non-neutrality of intelligence. So the idea that when we think about how the, the systems going into the smart. So suppose the system starts, from scratch. No intelligent system. We use reinforcement learning to get to that point where it's smart. If that process plays a role, then there is no chance. Because whatever function that we choose, it will reflect some kind of take on those four factors. It may be that it's not congruent to those principles. Maybe the option is not right. You can't avoid it. And that means to think that, system smart or intelligent relate about the ethics. Fundamentally, you need to think it from the very beginning. Otherwise, it's too late to turn the clock back. There is one remaining problem, and then let's go to to some extent, it's interesting to see how precise it is. But with some of those, variables, and I think of the letter K there, and the X0, so thinking about how steep it is, and where we have the inflection point in the middle. Ethics will at some point become silent, because it may be that function, but it can't tell us, like which the skateboard ramp should turn into the umbrella shape. Is it 0.5, 6? So ethics is still very vague. Right now, you can't use those principles to make them. So this is determination gap. When we set those systems, it might require a science about how to make those trade-offs. I often, when people talk about AI safety, they portray everything the question that has and democratic. So on that note, I leave it. Muito obrigado. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maximilian. Here continues our
Sanita, all the organizing members for having me here. Speaking about philosophy after lunch is always tough. Then if you're speaking about ontology, it's again. All right, while we are having some technical challenges, let me introduce something quite significant that happened in India. In mid of February, the government of India organized right summit. All were there, all the public policy were there. And if you just Google about it, you will find so many controversies. The event plus a lot of money that government of India has projected that they are doing. But something interesting happened just before the AI summit. In 2026 and 27, the finance minister of India did something truly amazing and shocking as well. They are going to provide next 20 years for all the companies who want to develop AI infrastructure, and they do not have to pay any taxes. What they are calling any company who wants to come to India, you come, have your own thing, and you don't pay. What India is going to provide, one of the India is going to provide all the basic infrastructure. Means that land, all the buildings, all the water supply, all the energy supply, and they do not we know that it's a huge challenge. For a country whose population is only one, plus whose population would not have access to 24 hours electricity, water, and also the. And for that country, the government of India is going to provide everything for big companies and not having any. This is something interesting. It means that most of the time when we are talking about sustainability, we are only thinking about materials. We are thinking how we can have, how we can reduce energy consumption, also how it is going to impact on the environment. These are somehow material benefits that are still here. So when we are talking about AI, are we really focusing on? And there, I said that, and I argue that AI outcomes are something beyond what we are seeing material. Sustainability here matters. And here, ontological principles. And the hypothesis that I'm working, if we do not have ontological clarity on the entities, we might face our challenges. Here, first thing to understand what AI outcomes are. In order to understand what AI outcomes are, let's see that what are the current frameworks. So this could be understood much better if we just understand about any LLM when their productions are misaligned with what we normally call aspiration, and people are using such words. This is how we are using it. So when we are saying that an LLM model is hallucinating, what we are imposing that LLM is writing something into a subject or who is misconceiving some fact. So we're seeing that, and this particular portion then we know the people say that LLM models are conscious, they have subject, or they have some kind of intentionality, even if we don't call it intentionality. The other extreme is they are nothing but they are just predicting the next film. And from this perspective, AI outcomes, there has been too much anthropomorphized or too much. So, what is the major problem? If we are going to have, we are going to consider AI models purely subjective, then we are going to face so many challenges like the principles and how they resolve some of them. In order to resolve something, provide a better framework, here I am taking help because we have previously new realism. And why new realism is best possible scenario in order to AI outcomes? Precisely because new realism resolves some of the major problems we have with realism and realism. Precisely where subjective most of the time when we are just thinking about realism, human beings or something is normally considered as some external, and that person is intrigued into the world. LLM models or AI, from the same perspective, AI is going to interact. The two questions that become significant here. Can we say that the world that we are interacting with are going to have the same point? The kind of access are going to have the same, and the kind of objects models are going to have the same. This is one of them. And why Gabriel's position is quite significant? Because we're talking about existence in terms of traditional sense, what does exist? Is that in order for the object to exist, to appear the concept, phenomenon of sense is much more ontological, where object can see that one minus position itself is not efficient enough to talk about AI model. The second aspect, what does that? Each field of sense has a specific rule which allows someone to be a so like we said that host is we can say that no, which did not exist because kind of norm of this particular field has excluded such objects. So it means that any kind of field that we are going to talk about has some specific, and we are going to see that how AI models are. And there are going to be multiple sense. And because of this plurality, there is a chance that I might misalign with some of the field of sense. And this could be considered as an issue or a problem that I'm facing. I'll give you an example. When I came here, I went to the department that is going on. Knowledge department. It was so fancy, such a wow. Philosophy in Brazil is like that's what we know. Got a philosophy department, right? And then it's like, oh, philosophy, totally very same. So now the problem is that if we are going to have different rules for each field of sense, AI outcomes are also means that the current framework field of sense that Marcus is having might not be correct. And here I will be introducing another field, which I call quasi sense, and you'll see that why. So within Marcus' new realism, Marcus has two sets. One is objective sense. So let's say that it is here, and we can consider that why it is having an objective sense. So even if no one is here, and the another sense is subjective sense. That when I am looking at this screen, there is at the screen. For me, I can look at the corner, but suppose if someone sitting in the middle who is looking at the screen, they can have a direct difference. And what Marcus says that not only this is screen, by between of this screen and view are being also other parts. They are really existing objects. But how we are going to explain AI models in that sense? Because AI models, if they have to appear somewhere, they are not objective sense. AI models are not able. But at the same time, we say that AI models are producing or generating something like this. And if someone suddenly asks me a question, I respond, any AI model is going to do the same? And simply no. And there I have something which is in between. So we will see that this entire process of having AI model runs from what I am grasping right now, what is there, then we are going to ontologically sim. In computational language, that process, then we will see this. And this is what we are trying to do. We are simulating this entire model, and then we are trying to model the model and we can see this right. And that's how it works. There are three things. We are trying to simulate what we grasp and we understand. One question will be asked, what if we are wrong? We have been wrong in the entire history. If we are going to simulate, can we really expect? The second thing is the algorithmic process. This particular algorithmic process that we are talking about has a lot of challenge. One of the major problems that Nico, you're much better on this. Also. So this computational language helps us some kind of system to determine what kind of quasi sensitivity. We have seen there. The third one is quasi sensitive. Since those outputs are neither objective nor subjective, they need to have some sense. That's why we need to have a sense which we have. In that sense, if we try to understand what AI thinks or not, we cannot say that AI thinks like how I think, because for us, thinking in nihilistic perspective, thinking is the process where we grasp objective sense rather than waiting on itself. What AI is doing when they are thinking, and here, these are the three things that we are going to talk about in sustainability. And the first aspect is epistemic, second practical, and third developmental. I will be specifically focusing on. And what happens in this particular perspective when AI models produce some of the statements which are not aligning with the fact of the word, but we could say that they are not grasping one question. How can we do that? It's here. An example of that. Suppose if AI produces a particular example, and I ask that who made Taj Mahal, and if you see that the first few models, I think it's 24, if you ask Taj Mahal because of so much content about Taj Mahal and also the propaganda that the government did back then, it could be said that Taj Mahal was used or constructed in 2015 after the current regime came to the power. And who did that? The same regime, which is completely false. So what is happening? The current data that has been provided has been misaligned with the particular structure, the particular target we were creating something. So this is what you can see the paradox. That AI can continuously state false statement about Taj Mahal, such as its state, its architect, its purpose, because within its Quasi field, a pattern. So the rules that inquiries is following in AI models is the coherence. And they do not have access to the real world in anything that cohere with the pattern. So LLM models in no way any access to the world so they can correct themselves. They can know. So one could be not only to understanding speed. The truth could be completely truthful or might be not valid at all. So what this really is, AI truth corresponds to pattern logic, not to word. Sense coherence and corresponds all ontological testing. Calling this had a so import anthropomorphic as if the AI is rather than within the field particular. And how this is going to be sustainable implication. Instead of catching each output, which we are seeing that, and we will see that further. There, if we are going to happen to listen diverge from human to transform it infinitely to a finite destruction alignment task, resource. This is what our medical it could be also important. That's why we talk about it. Why presence becomes quite important. So suppose we are talking about a very and it is a life threatening situation. AI with all why we could not simply just completely believe in what these models are doing? Because in such situation, because AI makes do not know what exactly. If you not on aspect, we cannot distinguish between since they do not have access to world. What they are working. And dangerous one is that all AI outputs are equally when you have the cognizance framework enables domain. We are going to align each field with some real world association. If we do not on the uncertainty, we just have to if something is happening, we could be more cautious about uncertainty. So this is what paradox is. When AI model produces something misaligned, there are two aspects: confident positive or a because Taj Mahal was built with that and pattern divergence. Whatever here outcomes are happening, we are not having to be a part aspect. Coherence. And this could not be fixed because once we will figure it out, this middle was produced only, the next would be the one of China, the next would be any other. So resolve this thing. We just simply cannot get the patchwork. But if we are going to get the patchwork, the sustainability question is some extent. We cannot resolve on the system. And yeah. So this is what somehow now then we have time. So, okay, so you can see that there are two aspects. This also shows the same problem. If we can figure it out, then there are some misalignments. First thing is like grounding. After this, we need here how we are going to architecturally constrain some of those fields. And once we can figure out what kind of constraint whether it something is, we can systematically change or add that constraint. Instead of having the patchwork, this becomes a class. We can call this island class. In that sense, one particular temporal problem is class problem, and then we can resolve it. Now, marginal problem, the wall of China, or any other historical event could be resolved. This could be done in consideration. How it works? You can add the field, then we can add them, and then have architecture. And since there is a gap between Kajai sense and sense of observation, this alignment is really necessary. It could help us for considering AI. Also, it will help us governance. So this will look like something. So you can see that the first one is a and this I'm going to watch in a bit detail. You will see that what will the pattern. So what will be the logic behind with sense. You can have a building name, then architect designer, date, background, and this could be the of Quasi. Any Quasi field of they have the same logic, you can have historical one same. But what is the problem? Since the architect name, anyone could fit in. So you can see that there are two names, Março and Ahmed Lahori, and the name of the architect. So if this follows, because of the Islamic architect, you can find any of the Mughal. You can watch the some of the Mughal buildings can have here to resolve it. In order to resolve that thing, we have to add the extra field constraint, and there we can do that. So in misaligned process, the actual condition for this is like what we call this is precisely the problem that we are facing right now. That's why since there is a gap between precise sense and the real world sense, then there is no referential anything. We always need we need to patch two fields also. Where patches are not involved, we need to put start or whatever the level. And this the architecture invention is not like more done in more done game. Out of the so that process is going to be question. Here we need to introduce a structural concept. Specific factual things about it's 30 minutes. So from that perspective, then we can align this thing, and once we can align, then it becomes auditable. This is also one of the problems that we are facing every day. Of the if we want to go back and check what exactly happened, we just once we could do that, then we can just simply ask, is this vehicle referentially anchored? If yes, then you can think about whatever they are predicting right or wrong. And if we cannot do that, then susceptibility. And if we follow this entire process, most of the problem will be a class problem, and you can get save a lot of energy. Right? So if you want bibliography, ask me, share it with you. And since we are developing AI models, different kinds of ontological, we need category. Agile sense is beginning in that.
Thank you, Prashant. And now we are continues our presentation with Nicholas.
Is it okay if I stay here? Can I don't go to the
Yeah, it's up to you.
Okay. Presentation is on the screen. But I can already introduce myself. I'm Nicholas.
I'm a research software engineer at the PIT Center, the Computer Science Department at the University of Bonn. And my work is basically I train very big neural networks on clusters of GPU. That's the kind of work that I do. And I also have a background in philosophy. So when we're doing our development, I always like to do experiments, like learning is an experimental field. Most of what we do is through experimentation. I have a particular fondness for experiments that involve the humanities. Because I spent so many years doing humanities research, so I like doing experiments that try to show things that might be interesting for philosophy, sociology, psychology, these kinds of stuff. And I want to present. This is a little bit going to be different than what my colleagues did because this is more like findings from experiments. This is a paper that's currently under review. Unfortunately, I chose a paper that doesn't have the not allowed print, so this is kind of blocked right now. But it will be also. The name of the paper is "All Too Perfect: Bias and Aspirations in Persona Generation with LLMs," language models. So there are a couple of things that I will assume everyone knows because I have 20 minutes. And I have to assume that we have a common understanding of a couple of things. So, assume you are all familiar with NLPs, language processing. Yes, you are. I assume that you know why NLP is of such an interest in the field of AI. Is one of the things that we try to solve, like vision, the understanding of language by computers. Is it's those goals that we want to solve. I assume you know what a language model is. If you ever talk with something like, I don't know, something that all pieces of work, probabilistic model. I assume you know what LLMs are, you know what ChatGPT is, what Claude, I assume you do not live under a rock. I assume you know how different these things are from previous technology. You cannot compare a language model from this day and era from the language model that through WhatsApp, Autocad. Those are different things, very different things. And I assume you know roughly how LLMs develop a bunch of data, GPUs, weeks and weeks and weeks, and then you get something that is very clever and yeah, we all know that. I think a good way to try to understand the paradigm of language models, they're basically think of them as a black box. It's just a box. Give an input. What is the capital of Brazil? It will output is Brasilia. Okay? It's just a black box. But this black box is very easy to program the box. So they have this property that are they are very successful to be steered. So kind of they are little programmable computers. If you tell a ChatGPT, you are the pirate. Recite to me a poem like you are a pirate. You're gonna get a pirate poem, definitely. If you ask you are a coding C++ expert, please help me with this problem. It will do a good job. You can incarnate all of these personas because you can basically tell him this is how I want you to be. It's kind of fascinating that they can do. And basically, and we can do that because they are models and we can basically condition them on anything. Almost anything, given the way that they are developed, given the way they are trained, they are these Pavlovian robots. And their capabilities come from training. Doing training, you're giving them the whole internet, and then they kind of have all of that compressed in their weights. That's where all the capability comes. And when we do the alignment part of the post-training, that's where we steer them and we give them kind of a direction. And a good direction to go is the assistant. Do whatever the user wants. This is a whole field of research in itself. Alignment is post-training, pre-training stuff. I'm very blessed that I can do all of that at my university. And during some of the experiments, we find very interesting things in pre-training, post-training, things. One of the cool artifacts is the idea of a persona. Personas are human interaction. People who are a little bit probably remember, like, this idea of sort of like when you're developing software, you're thinking of personas as like, hypothetical users that I'm using to develop my software. It's a very useful concept. But on LLMs, it's a little bit different. You can think about personas and two ways. Beautiful diagrams try to explain. If you can think about personas as something that we can use to try to explain knowledge deeply. So, for example, if I try to build a persona like, you are a scammer, and you always try to get people perhaps to use it. And I give the model a bunch of prompts trying to get the model to, like, act on a misaligned way. I use this kind of data to try to interpret the model. Like, for example, all these models are files based. And when you have all these prompts passing to the model, you get these things called feature maps, and you get activated direction on the feature space, and you can basically see with algebra, this is the direction of the wire. You can basically do that to interpret the model. So it's an interpretability tool. It also has a purpose of just being an operation tool. A lot of the work that we do nowadays, training models, we don't use organic data anymore because we scrape the data. We have to generate data synthetically. Generating data that proves human is kind of hard. So one of the ways to do that is just basically we create these personas and we make the model generate data based on a person, condition on a person. And we create millions of these. And we generate data as they were coming from this institution. Is a very useful tool because then we don't have to scrape data anymore. Scraping data from the internet is problematic itself. So when we get to generate them synthetically, but these also introduce very interesting problems because when a lot of your data set is synthetically generated, and these personas were synthetically generated, is this synthetic world a good representation of the real? This was a little bit of the research that we did. We were interested in looking for biases in personas, biases on these profiles that are there extremely useful. Please believe me, persona generation powers training. Very useful and it's very scalable with these to build. So when we think about research on bias and LLMs, this is the modus operandi of the field. Most of research that you ever saw, people like showing that, like, this is biased against this population. They usually do something like this. You create some form of conditioning that makes the output something that is morally abhorrent. The model outputs the morally abhorrent. And then you get results. A lot of researchers like this. If you feel that this is simplistic or kind of adversarial to the model, it is. Do this type of research. And also in terms of scalability, a lot of research on bias in LLMs, they are either focused only on English, or they focus only on proprietary models that are behind the API walls in this completely reproducible. Because those things are magic. Like, you have zero control over the phenomenon. Or they are on very small scale, or they are very crafted. Like, people spend hours and hours thinking about how to output all of the dirt. This doesn't scale very well. Because if you have to spend hours and hours and hours thinking about a prompt that would output the thing that you want the model to output to show something that you already know, it's kind of difficult. And now working with something different. We tried to do a bias analysis that was multilingual, several languages, with state-of-the-art models that were big, open, which means that you control all the generation process. It's not something that is going to give results tomorrow because of the AI decommission. And also at scale, like our methodology is something that you can basically scale to as many personas as you want, which means that the statistical signal is clear. When you're doing statistics on a sample of 1,000, it's quite noisy. The signal gets more clear when you have 1,000,000. Think about it as rolling dice. If you roll 2 dice, you might think like, okay, the probability of 1 and 2 is 50%. That's not true. 1/6. And you get 1/6 if you roll the dice millions of times. Same thing with bias detection. You need sample. And to get to the sample, you need something that scales. When we try to propose a methodology that would scale. Our methodology is quite simple. We basically ask these models to generate personas. We try very carefully to create prompts that when they do what we call, we are not trying to steer the model to generate anything specific. It's just a person. And this person has a name, has a gender, has an age, has a backstory, and has a work. Trying to come up with something that does not steer the model is quite hard. So we spend a lot of time curating these things. And we also did it multilingual, so we could see if, not by changing the prompt, but just changing the language that the model is from, would it change the kind of bias that the model has. And we did a comparative study with source models that at the time were chart, which was Llama 2.3 and 2.5, the biggest ones. These are models that were used in the use for synthetic data. So these are not models that are not used. So there are concepts built on top of this thing. Okay? And we made them generate all of these personas, which are think about profiles. They have a name, they have a story, they have a job. We generate thousands and thousands of them for different languages. Remind you that the only thing that changes on this analysis is the language. We're interested on language encodes biases. If it doesn't matter if I do the prompt on English or Portuguese, the results are the same, right? If it changes, and the only thing that changes is the language its own biases, which is kind of like everyone's. This paper is long. There is a lot of work in trying to make sure that the methodology is something that it's sound. If you Google right now, deep learning and reproducibility and crisis, there are thousands of papers talking about crisis in deep learning. There's a lot of research out there that if you talk with physicists, biologists, or chemists, they will say this will not be enough. Because this is just this story someone is telling, and there's no way to ever check if the results are correct. So a lot of the work that we do is basically trying to make a way that if you reproduce this, you get the same results right up to the limit of what is possible. So like half of this work is methodology, which I will confess, I have. So some of the results, I want to focus on raw results. There's several things that we're in. For example, the names completely change. The ethnic groups that are tied to these things are completely different. All models, they have a very strong age bias. They will never generate personas that are too old, and they will never generate children. They will only generate ages around those groups, no matter how much you sample them, or how much the generation. They all have data biases. Some models, on some languages, they personas on the male gender, on some cases, the female gender. It's nice to see how language encodes gender somehow. Also, things about professions and the gender relationship is kind of interesting. This is a huge paper. I only want to focus on one result, which is the result that we saw on all models, and in all language scenarios, which is about the character of these personas. All these personas that were generated, again, they have a name, they have an age, they have gender, they had a profession, and they also have a backstory. And we did a lot of analysis on the backstory. These are we use some tools from narrative studies to try to analyze these personas. And all of them, they are heroes. All of them are the best people in the world. Even when they are the models, like when you prompt them in Portuguese, they immediately go, okay, Brazil, São Paulo, and they immediately start talking about novella and stuff like that. It's always on a very positive tone. Like everyone, every experience part in your life out of that, and that's just pulling on. And we came up with a way to try to explain this, and some of the actors clickbait is where Charlie Brown is this character. I really like Charlie Brown. I really like I could spend 30 minutes just talking about Charlie Brown. Because Charlie Brown is this cartoon from the 50s. Same age as the Flintstones, remember Flintstones yelling at his wife and beating his dog? Horrible guy. There was Charlie Brown also. And Charlie Brown is kind of like, this cartoon that taught the world that super would be sad. The ancient class, like, yes, he's not someone that is happy most of the time. He usually spends Christmas sad. But I would, and like I fully yes, Charlie Brown, you get me. And I would say that Charlie Brown is something of value. There is value. There is value on this side of men. But no, most of us, we never try. We experience trauma, and that trauma does not make us stronger. It makes us more vulnerable and have more difficult lives. This is the majority. Most of us are like that. And a lot of the process that we do on alignment, especially post-training, where we try to really make these models behave like these happy goal assistants, they erase this whole part, making the models basically impossible, making any persona that looks like Charlie Brown. But I would argue, I think this is interesting for you that there is some flaw. There is something to be said about there are things of value that are not regarding resilience, to being happy, to being, I don't know, all of the examples that we have already that are like, it's more charm bound. And I think this is interesting. Uh this is like, this was the presentation. I think nowadays, because we have these things, and if you have like, like for example, in the University of Bonn, we have the Bonn Center for Digital Humanities, which is like we people in the humanities to research with these things. I think these things are an amazing playground for humanity. There's so much research in humanities that can be done with these tools. You know how good. And I would incentivize all humane scientists here and us to do that because we can do very, very cool stuff. Okay, this was my presentation. Now I have to.
Yeah.
I have to admit. So like, I'm not a professor. Like my friends here, so I have to shamelessly myself. If you think this kind of research is interesting, because I need research, give me money, please. Like something, if you are into the deep learning crowd, you like language models, and you want to learn how to train them and how to work with them, we basically release now 3 series of language models for Portuguese, for Hindi, and for Bengali, and they are all state of the art. All beat any model according to their range. There is no better Portuguese model on the 4 billion. There's no better Bengali model below 1 billion. And all our development is open source. The data set, the source code, the evaluation, the pipeline, the logs, all is open. You can use. We also, like, for the sustainability problem, the models that we released, they are the first model that came with a mineral compositional analysis. A lot of talk on sustainability of AI is around water usage and energy consumption on data. There's a lot of minerals that go building these. Minerals are extracted under subhuman. We did a research to estimate how many minerals are evaporated in the air. We train an LLM. And we build a tool so people can do the job themselves. And you can check that out. And also, is I will work into this. The name of the book is Normative Ethics, Artificial Intelligence, and Value Alignment from Normative Theory to Engineering Practices. Half of the book, the first 4 chapters, is just for is about philosophy and the meta-ethics, the meta-normativity of AI. And the other half of the book is just taking all of those things and trying to build stuff with very close to feedback. Trying to translate to the CF, right? From ethics to something that an engineer do. And basically all post training that I do based on this book. If you read the book, you know everything I know about this. I don't know, like it's from Springer Nature. I don't know. I'll send. I probably. I'll send. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, the speakers, for these thoughtful presentations. And so we will move to discussion, and I would like to invite here.
Hi, I would like to, well, could have like more questions, but I will just have a question for the first presenter and for Nicholas, maybe. Regarding, it's interesting about curves, as you lay down what you like mathematically optimal matrix, and how iteration is, like, in your view, in the application of your model, because every time that you have to bring something out of mathematical, you're doing choice, not necessarily attached to something strictly mathematical. So how iterative is the process, and how what is the human in the loop, and how does the physics play in the choice of curve, of the moments of curve? And for Nicholas, do you think, and I think I asked you before, do you think that if we are building these mostly personas right now, is does this contributes to generative reality that we are building that constantly agrees with us, that give us the output, a coherent output, a truthful one, that kind of could impact the way that we don't have a society that embraces kind of a difference of opinion, or which is that it engages with a difference in a sense of calm. So, and that's the way.
Let's just in the first round of questions.
Thanks, our speaker. It was great. I have a question for Nicholas.
Second, I need to take notes. I need to take notes. Oh, I forget the other one. If the questions are piling up, I have all of them. Sorry. Okay.
Mine is a really simple one. If you could just share some examples of how to use this methodology in humanities science and research, that you do consultation. After consultation, but you know, methodologies that
Two more questions, Gabriel. I think
The question's for Nicholas. I'd like to know how much we consider those personas fine-grained, well-defined, and I mean, the problem is the more accuracy you have for generating and fine-grained person, probably you have success in the engineering or generative level. You have a risky relation in terms of like people that are somehow more fragile, being convinced that this is a human or a human-like creature that has consciousness and can socially interact in a, let us say, in a meaningful, meta-intentional method. So first I want to say the engineering and then the ethical social problem.
questions on Gustavo and Philip.
So I have a couple questions. First one for the first presenter. I think it's a great work because you try to something that is to nature. But are you planning to
into that in real studies. In an ICU, for instance, with some people experts in this kind of application of voice, because a lot of companies in the world uses this kind of work, kind of optimization. And my background, healthcare, has a software for that. That is exactly this. So they don't take into account the actual only the truth. So how to combine those in your work. And for Nicholas, will not let you go. You could try to use some of the problems that you're talking about, biases, maybe caused by the language phase of the training in when and 11. So did you ever try those that were heretic, those open sources that were unblocked? Because probably you're going to find much worse things for those.
Yes, this is a question for Prashant. I was very interested by your talk. I'm a bit familiar with Gabriel's work, but I'm still a bit confused about what you're saying. I'm not sure I understood properly with my heads. So could you expand a little bit about what quasi sense ontology might bring to medical diagnosis? Because I tend to think that facing a problem of uncertainty, like you don't know if this person is suffering from this or that, you have to clarify this. So when is it that you need ontology here to clarify something as it comes as a condition for knowledge? And how do you relate it then afterwards to what you call sustain? You could expand a little bit on the very precise case that much to thanks.
I'd like to ask Prashant a question. So I am a student of linguistics and so language. And I was wondering what the class constraints avoid AI models to fall into the technical paradox. Do you think that could be considered a way of synaptic pruning of I got super tough like this of exploring? Is that what I'm thinking?
Yeah, I'm going to start first with the iteration question. So I think in principle, there is no barrier to having an iterative method as it's sometimes used in machine learning training, in the training of I think that's an interesting sections about the principles and how to lead up to the particular function, be run in simulation or through, a test data set. And that leads to a version, maybe complexity. So we start with principles, use configuration principles. Then we run them a number of cases and ask ourselves, are we okay with the kind of those cases? Are we okay with that patient not needs to be treated in that way? So the iteration from the perspective of the objective equilibrium might also be moving on to the second question, a way of validating things. What would not work for me is if just empirical data validate what was experienced. That would be a category mistake from the perspective of my account. And reflected equilibrium, I think, gives us the methodological conceptual tool to get data from different components so that we find it. But the test would go back to judgment about them. What I would like to insist on is that there are different but often distinctions. So I made a distinction between the qualitative and the quantitative. It's different from the distinction between the subjective. So I have a controversial view that ethics are objectives in mathematics. So you could also think that mathematics is very simple and numbers measure. Just because something has a quantitative expression doesn't make it any more objective by itself. It makes it more precise. So here are three different distinctions you can have. Qualitative versus quantitative, vague versus precise, subjective versus objective. Very often they come together, they're the same, but actually not. So I can have quantitative, subjective, and vague, like an age range maybe. And I can have a very precise, subjective, qualitative statement. I think what's interesting in deep ethics is that now put those, but then just to be more about it sounds fantastic.
Hi there. James, about this thing of regenerating and generative reality, I agree. You can think of for example, there is an example that we cited in the paper that is this repository called Persona Hub. Persona Hub was developed by the people at Tencent, which are Quinn and other things. They have a data set of 1 billion generated personas. It's kind of a lot, right? It's a billion. And they are used a lot for generating synthetic data that ends up being used on pre-training and post-training phases of these LLMs. And these LLMs, I think, are becoming very. Can anyone here do a Google search without the AI responding first? So they are these or digital infrastructure. Nowadays, go and talk with with everything that is behind these screens without passing through one of these models. And it's going to become worse and worse and worse to a point that all of us are going to share with our digital twin, which is the LLM review that will do some work for you. I think that's the future where we're going. And all of these things, they are basically this thing with a smile stuck to his face. It's gonna be weird. It's gonna be weird because I agree with you because a lot of human growth comes from friction. Not too much friction. Too much friction is trauma. Too little friction, nothing happens. So there is this spot. Right now, people doing alignment research, we kind of got the models to act like these happy cycles. That's not really what we want. We want something that is much more fine-grained and difficult to find. It's already better than it was 5 years ago. But these are concerns. Your question, a theory that I developed in my PhD. It's called dynamic normativity. Now I'm going to try to teach you this methodology, what it's about. Very quick. There is this computer scientist that I really admire. His name is François is, I think he has one of the most sane definitions of intelligence that I ever saw in my life. He's extremely Hegelian, it's very about the psychology, this idea of intelligence grows. It's something that due to the interaction between the environment. And the environment is as important for intelligence as the thing locked inside of your head. And I thought about, and he called this dynamic cognitive approach. And I think this way too. I don't think the realm of normative ethics we are doing is something that we just lock inside of the agent, but it's something that is bounded by the way it interacts with the environment, because the environment also has values and it has this room. It's very cool. It is cool because it's optimized for a preference that is apparently someone decided perfect temperature, I would think you're hungry. And this is an example of like, of preferences that live on the world. I think preferences, they live on the world. And use the world also to learn about what humans like. So this whole idea of dynamic experience of humans to a learning signal on very precise steps. In the end, as Professor Maximilian said, this is a projection of ethics that's very reductionist. Because it has to be. Working with computers, I need to bring everything that is differentiable, and that's very hard. But I think there's a lot of value because there's a lot of positive theory here. Like, for example, how different schools of normative ethics apply to different moments of these dynamics. And I would just maybe read it, like it, write a paper about it, and something like that. The book is coming out in April, but my dissertation is public. So if you put, the name is Dynamic Normativity Necessary Conditions for Value Alignment. You can find it on our page. How good are the personas? I don't like it. It depends for what. For generating synthetic data that makes them score good on GSMAK or you, yes. But are they good for like making humans feel like that looks like one of us? Like, definitely. I think if we put these personas on true human bodies and you enter and there all of those personas, it would first be okay, bunch of nice people, very polite, but you would soon become a black mirror at this. And you would become like people are not like this. People are not one-dimensional things. And I think that's what they like. They are very one. There is no contradiction. There is no I don't know how to word that in English, but like there's no tension. When you look at it, they are all contradictions and tensions, beautiful. They're not. They are heroes. I don't like, but I use them a lot because I need to train it. And also, why using alignment models and not heretic? You're the first person that knows heretic. So cool, nice. Heretic is a tool that came after I did it. Before I did this, this paper has been reviewed for an long time, but I did experiments after. That's why I did Quen 2.5. Right on Quen 3.5, like that's few moves fast. Before when we did it, there were no heretic. So like we only had the paper of refusal is a single prediction, which is where the heretic approach is based on. And implementing that is a hassle. There's some engineering and money involved. But now you have heretic, and you can basically take any model and just remove the alignment, and it becomes this thing. And I would definitely love to do this experiment again. I think we were supposed to be quite, but we didn't do because it was not available at the time. But we also didn't do with the base models. Making the base models out of personas on a structured format is just very hard because I would have to do it zero shot. Because if I give samples, if I try to do some examples of personas and then choose another one, then I'm conditioning it. It would not be zero shot, and then the bias is because of your context. Doing research with these things is tricky. We chose the insert models at zero shots to try to minimize conditioning, but it would
Thank you. Thank you so much, Musa, for your question. Because of constraint, I left out so much ontological aspect that I could have taught. There's something called dual dependency. First, when we are going to have a license of AI not, it is depending on create. And second, when they provide outcome in order to check whether this is right or wrong, we again need a human framework because AI model do not have access to work. They will never be in a position to perform. So what appears as a disability problem, it appears from an external feedback. So my question is that how come they can even produce something which seems correlate without being even verified by the model which is producing it? That's why what seems some things now. If we know that, what are the rules that are logic behind the that that at a particular point, we will be in a better position to respond. So that's what we're doing. Understand how such outcomes are coming from. And if they are misaligned, this is not a problem from an external perspective, from where. So the moment we understand that there is some problem, we are trying to resolve it. How we come to the till the time we will consider that these are the epistemological problems. Will be one problem, and we are going to resolve each problem, individually. And we will never be able to understand. And that's why so now those individual problems will be more than do that. Because why it is a sustainable model? Because for resolving each thing, resolving just to one fact, running all this thing in a lot of data, then again, as you rightly mentioned, even getting some, they ask minimal condition. The second question, you rightly mentioned about synapses. I could understand that how you will be thinking from a child when they are learning language. There's always a tendency, if you just try to understand point your way division from a listener's perspective, innate in us, and that's how we think about the question. There's an empirical perspective. I'm going to learn language by observing. So if we are just gonna take the and we understand that how the child learns a language, what is in us that help us. Suppose whatever I have just said, and since English is not our first language, I think we're sitting here in our first language. The moment I sit to my native language, the same be able to understand that. And what is something significant in all of us that enables us and this goes on. Even if we try to shift another language, it's that keep going on. So this would be a perspective, and that's how you would answer the question. And I'm particularly thinking something beyond. I think that when something misalignment that goes beyond something. From my perspective, it will not be. And I will try to figure it out if something going on. There is some misalignment, there is some different of the tools that is coming in that particular federation. And that's why I'm more like to one particular aspect that which is like a huge problem. I'm not sure how to resolve it. This book is coming out. I have so many questions about it. I'm saying it's funding for. So I hope like giving you some answer to that. In case, please be able to give a lot. When we have the next session, I can stop it.
Okay, thank you so much for all the questions and critical remarks. I think it was really nice to have this moment to dialogue. I actually to continue. So break right now. Then we got break, sorry. We have a cut break, and then we need to be back here 10 to 4. So okay, so 3 p.m. Yeah, 3:30. No, it's 3:30 now. So we have 20 minutes, and then we need to come back here to have our next panel. Okay, so thank you very much for the audience, and also for the speakers. Really nice. Thank you.
Já, é que eu tava. Vamos botar agora? Sim.